Many of you know I have an anniversary coming up. It has a round number in it. So I always enjoy hearing songs from our wedding day. And Claire DeLune was one of those, and I've never heard it set to Silent Night, so that's beautiful. Thank you. I agree with what Dale was commenting on and was experiencing. It seems as though this point in the season is about the time when it's easy to be overrun and overwhelmed. And I think about in the life of the church, too, that with lots of business to tend to and with important announcements, with renovations wrapping up, and I don't know how many pieces of ministry we will announce at the end of today's service, it is easy to miss on a moment of peace and a moment of worship and simply to participate in the rush. So I want to ask if you'll join me for a moment of silence, just a little pause. And if perhaps you have arrived here distracted today, perhaps this can be the moment where you set those distractions aside and come together before the throne of mercy of our God. Would you pause with me in stillness and for a word of prayer today? Loving God, we are grateful that whether we come before you with loud shouts of celebration or bow before you in still silence, you are our God, and you draw us unto yourself. Thank you for the hope, the expectation that accompanies our journey to the manger. Help us to make room in our hearts for you once again. In Jesus' name, amen. Today we continue a sermon series in which we are using and borrowing from Hollywood films of the Christmas season in order to understand more fully those rich prophetic passages from the Old Testament book of Isaiah. Again and again and again, throughout the book of Isaiah, for generations, Christians have come to passages and have said, I don't know all that Isaiah was thinking about writing 600 or 700 years before the arrival of Jesus. I can't speak to all that he was expecting when he described the Messiah. But in Jesus, some way, somehow, mysteriously and wondrously, we see those expectations fulfilled and transformed. And so those images, though they predate Jesus by hundreds of years, they enrich our experience of him in our lives. For example, in the days after Jesus, for days, weeks, months, years, decades, generations, Christian believers would come together and continue to read their holy text, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. And they would come to those passages and realize that they were speaking of the Messiah, speaking of the promised one of old, and that Jesus had somehow fulfilled them. This passage today from the Old Testament book of Isaiah, chapter 11, is one of those passages. I invite you to read with me and see familiar themes, language that has been brought forward and applied to the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. Isaiah 11, beginning at verse 1. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. The wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, the young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. On that day, the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal to the peoples. The nations shall inquire of him, and his dwelling shall be glorious. The stump of Jesse, the line of David. Matthew and Luke, in their gospel stories, would recognize that Jesus hailed from this line. Verse 6, a little child shall lead them. This may be one of the most oft-quoted passages in the entire Hebrew Bible. From all across the Old Testament, this particular passage stands out. I'll remind you that tonight is the children's Christmas cantata. Little children will be leading us this evening. You may have already been aware of that, since there is a giant Christmas ornament over here next to the tree. If you're wondering what the theme is for the Christmas program, they are living ornaments coming out of a Christmas box tucked away in an attic. You'll love it. I especially commend to you one particular little snowflake. A little child shall lead. Why does this image stand out? Why is it so frequently repeated? Why is it so important that a child should lead? Well, first of all, it's certainly unusual. It seems to be backwards that a child should lead. We often think of children as having so much that they yet need to learn, and it's wonderful what they can do with their giftedness and their little personalities and all the little bit that they do know, but there's so much still out there, an entire world to be explored and conquered. Of course, this is sort of the danger of the information age, right? In the information age, youthfulness has become synonymous with being technologically adept. And being technologically adept has become synonymous with being relevant culturally. And being relevant culturally has become synonymous with wisdom. And to paraphrase the prophet, that ain't wisdom. It matters that a child should lead, not only because it's unusual, but because it's hopeful. Think of the times throughout recent history when there's been a movement, a groundswell among young people. What an injection of hope that it has brought into our society. When we see young people motivated for good, it is inspiring to us all. It matters deeply that a little child should lead because it is palatable for we older folks. I don't know about you, but there are messages I can hear from children that I almost cannot hear from anyone else. From my peers, from my elders. There's certain messages I don't want to hear. But if it's in a child's voice, I will listen. I think it's because there's a special way that children learn. Children learn with innocence. They learn without shame. They're not worried that they didn't know this particular good. Whereas an adult will put on airs and pretend that they knew all along, or be very defensive about a lesson that they don't yet want to learn. When I learn, it's begrudgingly, but when a child learns, it's matter of fact, it's inquisitive, it's without an edge. A little child shall lead. of all Christmas films, there is one that teaches this best of all. Home Alone was in theaters in the winter of 1990 and into 91. The setting was modern-day Chicago. I realize this is back-to-back weeks of movies set in modern-day Chicago. I don't know what that's about. I like Chicago. Chicago's a fine place. I promise I'll branch out and we'll have a film from some other location soon. But the heroes of the story are the McAllister family, Peter and Kate and their kids, most especially their youngest child, Kevin. The date is sometime in late December. Several households of the McAllister clan have come together in Metro Chicago in Peter and Kate's home because they'll be flying out the next day, traveling overseas to yet another household of the McAllister clan that happens to live in Paris, France. Now, we get a little glimpse into the inner workings of this family in their dinner time the night before the trip. And it's obvious that they experience the strain that most, if not all, families feel when they get together. There's lots of pushing of one another's buttons. There's lots of falling back into the familiar old routine of assumption and blame and other roles. Now, most families have a release valve. Most families have one person in whom the family's stresses find an outlet. We label those folks with accusatory and dismissive terms, inappropriate terms like black sheep or outcast. The person labeled as the problem often is not the problem, but really the way the family functions. For if it were not for the release valve, the black sheep of the family, the rest of us would have to deal with our stuff. But as long as that person is still around, well, we can just point at that individual. For the multiple households of McAllisters gathered for Christmas, that person is little Kevin. And the critical transition in the film comes when there's an argument at dinner. Lots of people of all ages and generations are to blame for this moment, but Kevin takes the blame and is banished to spend the night in the attic bedroom. The next morning, the adults oversleep, and in the mad rush to get out the door, this is what happens. And just like that, the annoying, pushy neighbor from across the street, is counted as one of the McAllisters, and Kevin is left in the attic until he awakens disheveled a few hours later. Now, there's two keys to this film. One is plausibility. The way Kevin gets left behind amidst that craziness and the insistence of this pushy neighbor to climb into their vans and root through their stuff, it's just barely plausible. The things that Kevin does to fill his time after the family leaves, his defense against the wet bandits. Now, who are the wet bandits? Meet Harry and Marv, two petty thieves who have chosen the wrong neighborhood to rob this Christmas. There's just barely this credible level of plausibility. And the second key point to hold the success of this film is anxiety. For though it's plausible that a kid would get left behind, though it's plausible that a child would do the laundry if his parents weren't home, and so on and so forth, let's be honest now, how long can a 10-year-old really make it, especially when he's being targeted by older, stronger predators? Plausibility and anxiety, these are the keys to the film holding together, and these are the keys to Isaiah chapter 11. Plausibility, that good will prevail, that the people of God will turn away from evil, that God is a forgiving God, that God will restore and protect God's chosen people, and that God still wants to be our God after it all. The question, do I believe that I am loved, is at the root of this plausibility. And anxiety in Isaiah chapter 11. Anxiety that will crush the innocent. That the wolf will do what a wolf always does. That the lion will do what a lion always does. That the bear will do what a bear always does. That the snake will do what a snake always does. That the bigot will do what a bigot always does. That the madman will do what a madman always does. That the bully will do what a bully always does. And the question, does justice ever really prevail? Now, there are three potential predators in Kevin's world. We've already met Marv and Harry, the wet bandits. Those are the first two. But the third potential predator is much closer, and he's not a stranger. The third potential predator is the next door neighbor, Old Man Marley. Now, Old Man Marley is this fella who has a habit of walking out the front steps of his home and pulling a heavy trash can up and down the sidewalk. It's full of salt, and he uses his snow shovel to salt everybody's sidewalk. You would love to have a neighbor like Old Man Marley. But the rumor going around, and the rumor that presumably has been passed down among the children for years and years and years, is that Marley has another true identity. He is, in fact, the South Bend Shovel Slayer. And back in 1958, he murdered his entire family with his snow shovel and has hid the bodies for all these years, presumably in the bottom of the salt pail. Now, Kevin takes this story to heart. Isaiah 11, verse 3. His eyes believe what they have seen, and his ears believe what they have heard. So he bumps into Marley on the street, and he screams, and he runs, and he hides in his parents' bed, and he bumps into Marley in the corner store, and he backs away and runs, and in the process steals a toothbrush. Verse 3, what his ears have heard is complete truth to him. What his eyes have seen is beyond dispute, so that it has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everything that he sees of Marley seems to confirm the worst that he has heard. Marley is the South Bend shovel slayer. The shovel slayer is Old Man Marley. Kevin is dangerously close to becoming a grown-up. Because we grown-ups are virtually powerless to overcome such cycles. We watch things that reinforce what we already believe. We read things that reinforce what we already believe. We mostly organize our schedules to have conversation with people who reinforce what we already believe. And we will stay in these cycles, most of us, most of the time, unless a little child shall lead us. Now, as everyone knows, absence makes the heart grow stronger. And so it is for Kevin. He starts to miss his family, wants to bring them back. He goes to Santa first, of course, but then he settles for the neighborhood church. He wanders in off the street, and there's a children choir rehearsing. Before he knows it, Kevin comes face to face with our collective anxiety, the viewing audience. Because in the next pew over, just across the aisle from him, sits the predator, Old Man Marley himself. Now, there's a funny thing about that name, isn't it? Marley. Haven't we heard that name before? Marley. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Marley. Deceased business partner to Ebenezer Scrooge himself. Marley. And what is his role in Dickens' beloved table? His ghost, the ghost of Marley, appears to Scrooge with a two-part message. First of all, you bear the chain you forged in life. And by the way, Scrooge, as large and as cumbersome as my chain is in my appearance to you as an apparition, your chain was just as large and cumbersome 7 Christmas Eves ago, and you've been adding to it ever since. And the second part of Marley's message is, you will be haunted by 3 ghosts. We may come back to that on another Sunday soon. And it won't be set in Chicago. How about that? I promise. Marley had this to say, quote, mankind was my business. Scrooge compliments him. You were such a shrewd businessman, Marley says. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light could have conducted me? I am here tonight to warn you, Ebenezer, that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. And so it is that Marley, of the Home Alone variety, steps over to Kevin and with a smile on his face wishes him a Merry Christmas and asks to sit down. He is the first adult in the entire film to speak to Kevin as if he were a grown-up. Marley asks to sit down, as if he will recognize Kevin's right to decide if he wants to be bothered in church on this day. It's a crossroads for Kevin. Everything he thought he knew is at a crossroads. He thought he knew that he hated his family. He thought he knew that Marley was the South Bend shovel slayer. But is it possible that, like verse 3, he has been judging only by what his eyes see and deciding only what his ears hear? Is it possible there's more to creation than what he himself has perceived? Let's see. How you feel about your family is a complicated thing. You can forget you love them. Even believe you don't love them. Your ears can tell you things that you think you believe. Your eyes can tell you things that you think you know. But a little child will lead them. If we grown-ups are to stand a chance of growing up into what the Lord desires us to be, if we're to learn, it will be as a child, inquisitively. If we are to be innocents standing up to power, it will be as a child, humbly. If we're to be saved, it will be through the child who came in the most unexpected of ways, hundreds of years after Isaiah, in a bywater sort of place, a backwater. There no one would have expected there to be anything of significance. And yet the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. The Spirit of the Lord brought wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, and most of all, the fear of the Lord. Isaiah expected it. But Jesus of Nazareth lived it. In just a few moments, we will come to the table to share the Lord's Supper together. In addition to a time of remembrance, may it also be for us a statement of belief that a child will lead, that good will prevail, that God will restore. Let it also be a statement of intent, that I will pursue the one upon whom the Spirit of the Lord rested. I will follow after him. Let it also be a statement of commitment. I shall judge not by what my eyes see, nor by what my ears hear, but rather I will seek first his righteousness and live in his faithfulness. I will try to live a life that does not hurt or destroy, so that nations may inquire of the root of Jesse, so that every knee should bow and every tongue confess that Jesus, the Christ, is Lord. Friends, today the Lord's arms are open wide. The doors of the church are open unto you. If today you are making a decision to receive Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, we want to give you an opportunity to let that decision be known. As we sing this next song, would you come forward and share what it is that's on your heart? Others may be making decisions to leave behind a life of sorrow, of despair, of hurt and want, of injustice. You may be recognizing the need for a little child to lead you forward in life. And if so, if you are ready to come humbly, inquisitively, to pursue after that life, then we want to celebrate with you. If you have found that you are alone in your faith and need fellowship within the body of believers, we would be privileged to welcome you in the life of GBC. However it is that you need to respond to the work of the Lord in your life, we stand and we sing in hopes that you'll come.